All right, welcome to this lesson. And in this lesson, we will be starting our Java programming. We will be creating our models in this lesson. But before we get started, I want to take a look around this project really quickly just to get you familiar with the layout and where everything is. So, in this source main Java package right here, this is where all of our main classes are going to be. All the classes that we write, our models, controllers, everything's going in the source main Java folder right here. The source main resources folder here is where we would have any properties, files, or any other resource file. At the moment, we will only have one file here. That is our application.properties. Ignore the static in the templates. That is for something that we are not going to be using. So this is the only file we care about that's in this folder. The testing source test Java files for testing. And these other folders, Maven dependencies, is where all of our dependencies are, like the security dependency, the web dependency, all of those dependencies that we added last lesson, they are stored in here. Also, this is just the same as this source folder. It's just these are an easier way for us to get to them. But this will be actually the source main, and then this is Java, and this is resources out of the main. All right. And so the rest of these files you really don't have to worry about. This pom.xml file is really important, but we will not talk about that at the moment. So to begin, we will start by clicking on this source main Java, expand that folder, and you can click here on the ATW Airlines and expand that folder. This class right here, ATW Airlines application, is our bootstrap class. This is the class that bootstraps all of the Spring stuff pretty much. So this Spring application run, this will bootstrap. We won't be doing anything in this class, but just know this is where everything begins. This is your main class, and this is where everything starts at. All right. So now to begin our lesson on creating the models, we will click. You can right click here if you're in Eclipse. Go to New, Class. All right. We're going to add to this package. We will go and call this package model. So it'll be com.atw.airlines.model. And to start off, we can make the trip model. So have a class called trip, and we'll hit the finish. All right, once you have your trip class up, we can go ahead and start adding our fields. But for the model classes, these will only be POJO, so there's no real logic that goes into them. There's only fields, constructors, and getters and setters. So for the trip class, we only have 3 fields. We will have an ID, a customer ID that links us to the customer table, and then we have a create date, which is the timestamp for when that trip was created. So we would do a private integer ID, a private integer customer ID, and a private timestamp. And this would be create date. And make sure you import your timestamp. So these classes correspond to the columns in the table. So remember when we created our table, we had an ID column, customer ID column, and a create date column. That's what these are. So from here, I'm going to use some shortcuts from Eclipse to create our constructors. All right, so I'm going to create a basic regular empty constructor. Also, I will create one with the fields. Generate. All right, and I also will create the getters and setters. And lastly, I will actually create a toString as well for when we want to print it out to the screen. All right, so for our first class, you can actually get rid of the supers in both of these if you want to. So here, this is our trip class, and our trip class is now complete. This is our model. So in order for this model to be registered as a bean with Spring, we have to add certain annotations to it. I will show you what an annotation is right now. So an annotation is used for Spring to know to execute certain things to do. So basically, when you put certain annotations, Spring will know that, oh, hey, this is a bean, or this is something else. So it tells Spring what to do with this code. So for us, we will need to use an annotation that is called entity. So entity annotation. So that will, you use this @ symbol, then you would type entity, and then also you import that, and it will be this Java X persistence entity. Boom, there we go. So that lets Spring know that this is an entity class. Also, you can add another annotation, the table annotation. This is also letting Spring know that this is a table, and then you can have name equals trip. So this is what our table name is, and that's just letting Spring know. It's also Java X persistence, but it's the table class. So there we go. That's that. And we also need to let Spring know which column is the ID column. So it won't automatically know that this ID field is related to the actual ID column of the table in our database. So we have to explicitly tell it that with this annotation called ID. It's the ID annotation. All right. Lastly, we do have to tell Spring that we are using an auto-generated ID, so we don't have to increment it ourselves. And we do that by adding this @generated value annotation, and it also needs a strategy of generation type dot auto. All right, and then you also need to import this generated value. Okay, so what this is doing is telling Spring that, hey, this ID is a generated value, and the strategy that we're using to generate this is auto. So when we created our table, we used auto increment. So we're telling it, hey, auto increment this for us. This is what we're using. This is the strategy. So when we're adding an entry, it knows how to increment the ID. So once you do this, this is it. It's done. We are completely done writing this model class. So we have a trip model. It's entity. We're letting Spring know that this is an entity and that the table name is trip and that this is a table. Also, we're letting Spring know that this ID field is the ID column for the table, and we're also letting it know that it's a generated value and its strategy is auto, so it's auto incremented. All right, this is all for trip. Also, we're going to do this for the other tables. Let's see. So you go class, create a new class. We'll call this one ticket. All right, once you create the ticket. All right, we're going to do the same thing here. So for this ticket class, we have a private int ID, private int trip ID, private string destination from private string destination to private date private cancel private boolean cancel private create date. All right, I have added these fields, so make sure you import the correct imports for these classes for date and timestamp. Also, we will do the same thing. We will generate our constructors. And then also our getters and setters. And a toString. All right. Once we have that, I like to remove these just for myself. You don't have to, but I like to. All right. Once they are removed, you can go up here and we need to add, once again, the at entity. Then we can do the at table. Name equals ticket. You can import those. Both are Java X persistent. And then we do at ID and also generated value strategy generation type dot auto, and then also import those. There we go. Now this model is complete. So you continue the same process for the other ones. I will speed through this so you don't have to keep hearing me say the same thing over and over again. All right. So now we have our 3 tables done. And this is all for the models. So next up, we will be creating our repositories. See you in the next one.